You found a skeleton. How would you tell what to recognize? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, welcome everybody. This is a debate between Jackson Wheat and Finding Truth on the Cambrian Explosion. Today, our debate resolution is the Cambrian Explosion can be explained by random mutations and natural selection. On the pro side, we have Jackson Wheat, and on the con side, we have Finding Truth. Jackson, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and let people know what they can expect on your channel.
Well, hello. My name is Jackson Wheat. I am a grad student in college, and I run a YouTube channel where I discuss concepts in evolutionary biology and zoology, and occasionally debunk creationism. And so if any of that interests you, come check me out.
Awesome. And Finding Truth, if you could do the same.
All right, so my name is Ahmed. I'm communications and electronics engineer. I also did my master's courses for computer engineering. I did a master's of business, international business, and I studied theology for 4 years. I have 30 years experience in information systems and 20 years of them as an executive, designing and implementing complex information systems. I also run my channel, which is called Finding Truth, and it discusses issues that are between science and religion, existential questions. I especially like to discuss evolution and the creation of the cosmos, among other things. So if you like that, you can also check out my channel.
Awesome. All right, and so we are going to be diving right into opening statements soon. I'm just going to describe the format for everyone watching. We are going to do up to 15-minute openers. They don't actually have to reach that, but they're allowed to go that long. I will be giving people a 1 minute and a 30-second warning if they need it. We're going to have Jackson go first as the affirmative, and we're going to have Ahmed go second as the negative. Then we're going to open it up for about an hour or so of open discussion. And then for the last half hour of the stream, because I'm going to cut it off around 2 hours, we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. Of course, if you do super chat, you do come to the front of the line for Q&A, and also it is the most reliable way for me to get the question if you give it before the start of Q&A time. But if you don't want to pay for that question, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure you @DapperDino so I can see it easily during the last half hour section. And with that, I think we are good to start off. So Jackson, I will start my timer on your first word.
Wait, on my first word? Hold on, wait, can I restart?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Oh wait, I have a screen to share.
Okay, I'll start. Your first word after you screen share. How about that? Killing me, Jackson.
A window. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Clickety clackety. Can we see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fantabulous. Stop sending me messages. Okay, need do theater mode. Okie dokie. All right. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for having me on, Dapper.
You're welcome.
Much appreciated. The topic is Cambrian Explosion. Can random mutations and natural selection explain it? I am taking the consensus position in both biology and paleontology and arguing yes, evolution by mutation and natural selection, as well as the other mechanisms of evolution, is the best explanation for the events collectively known as the Cambrian Explosion. To begin, I want to point out that this is, as far as I'm aware, not a debate about the age of the Earth. Young Earth creationism versus evolution is not the point here. That would be a separate debate. The point here is also not the origin of life or the origin of the universe, for that matter. Those are also separate topics. The arguments here are twofold. How does evolution work, and how can it alone explain the events of the Cambrian Explosion? Now, these two questions raise a massive number of issues, and for that reason, I'm going to quickly jump through several slides. My hope is that we can... I have changed slide. Did it not show it? Well, that is absolutely tragic. Hold on. Can you see it now? I'll just do it this. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, whatever. Do I have to restart my whole thing? Should I dance for 30 seconds? Okay. My hope is that we can just return to them during the discussion portion. You saw that change? All right, good. I will first give an overview of evolution and an overview of the Cambrian Explosion. The first step of evolution, if you will, is that organisms are born with genetic variations. Mutations are largely random, at least random with respect to their effects, occurring by such blind processes as tautomerization of base pairs and resulting in DNA being incorrectly copied during replication. Germline mutations are then passed along from one generation to the next via sperm and egg cells. These variations, if they have any effect at all, make an organism either better or worse at existing in an environment. Over time, these variations accrue in separate populations, leading to speciation. The points outlined thus far are non-controversial to any major anti-evolution organizations, both young Earth and intelligent design. The question then is, does the Cambrian radiation display this process? Again, I, as well as the vast majority of researchers in the relevant fields, answer yes. In fact, we can make predictions about what sorts of patterns we should expect in the Cambrian based on evolution versus intelligent design. For example, evolution proceeds based on incremental changes, so we should expect to find populations of organisms that change over time. The Cambrian period is often said to be the period wherein most of the animal phyla appeared. However, this statement is very misleading since the word phylum is an arbitrary term for a large group of modern species. For example, beetles, bees, wasps, ants, flies, butterflies, grasshoppers, praying mantises, cockroaches, dragonflies, lobsters, crabs, centipedes, and spiders, and scorpions are all within the phylum of arthropods. But saying that the arthropod phylum appeared in the Cambrian makes it sound like all of these were present back then, but that is wrong. None of the arthropods I just listed were present in the Cambrian, not even the iconically prehistoric horseshoe crabs. The arthropods that were in the Cambrian are all extinct. Some are barely discernible as very basal crustaceans or very distantly related to arachnids. For some Cambrian arthropods, even the experts aren't sure whether they are more closely related to crustaceans or arachnids, as if representing the time when the ancestors to both were virtually identical. And then there are others that are not closely related to any extant groups, such as Anomalocaris. And what about our phylum, the chordates? Most chordates that we are familiar with today have jaws, but jawed chordates did not exist in the Cambrian either. This is why terms like phylum or phyla aren't really informative. Instead, we need to use terms like crown and stem lineages. The aforementioned Anomalocaris is an example of a stem arthropod. Under common ancestry, we should predict that, though they can coexist at different points in time, the oldest stem lineages will be found in older strata than the oldest crown lineages, and indeed this is what we find. We find stem bilaterians, basal Lophotrochozoans, and basal panarthropods, which are groups that encompass multiple phyla in the Precambrian, and we'll get to some later. Intelligent design predicts that there should be an identifiable point at which we can determine when the designer intervened. Where is that in the case of the Cambrian? Is it at the start, 500?
Jackson,
What?
I think we're still at the overview slide. Are you flipping
Oh, yeah,
it?
we are.
Not yet. I haven't changed it yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm just about to, though.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you an extra 30 seconds or so just to make up for that.
Okay, that's fine. That's what it is. Is it at the start, 542 million years ago? If so, then does that mean the claudinids, arboriomorphs, and other holdovers from the Precambrian are not designed? How can we tell any designed animals from ones that evolved from previously designed animals? If the design event occurred earlier, then when? Which of these events, if any, signals the handiwork of the designer or designers, and how do you know? Is it 575 million years ago, 800 million years ago, 1.4 billion years ago? Phylogenomic data indicate that the common ancestors of various clades occurred a long time prior to the Cambrian radiation. It should then come as no surprise that animals are indeed found in the Precambrian. Come on. Okay, here are some slides with Precambrian organisms, which are designed and which aren't. And of course, we can come back to these later if you want. Early life had been around for a long time, so what changed? At the end of the Precambrian, several factors occurred together that caused the radiation. Oxygen levels began rising, allowing for larger body sizes, as well as more complex food webs of primary, secondary, etc. consumers, and this kick-started a series of evolutionary arms races. At the very end of the Precambrian, cloudinids had boreholes in their shells. This was the very first evidence of predation. No longer were animals simply grazing on cyanobacterial mats. Vertical burrowers like priapulid worms appeared at the start of the Cambrian, and these burrowers both aerated the sediment and destroyed the mats. This radically changed the environment, and the history of life attests that with changes in the environment, new animal adaptations arise. Zooplankton evolved around the beginning of the Cambrian as well. They feed on phytoplankton, and larger suspension feeders consume the zooplankton. The development of eyes, armor, limbs, and pelagic swimming animals that would set the stage for still more changes to come occurred over time rather than all at once. Here is a chart from a 2018 paper demonstrating exactly this. The origination of various animals occurred over time, not all in one go. But a different way, we can see that the earliest stem lineages do in fact precede the earliest crown lineages, just as we expect under evolution. Stem lineages evolved and radiated, but were ultimately outcompeted by the crown lineages. A 2019 paper incorporated the previous chart into this new chart, which shows the evolution of different lineages across the Precambrian-Cambrian boundary. As you can see, the soft-bodied organisms appeared first and overlap with the first organic walled fossils, which overlap with the later biomineralized fossils. These are all the telltale signs of an evolution event, not a design one. Then if you want to discuss particular lineages, we can do that. I have prepared slides regarding the evolution of arthropods and the evolution of chordates. I even found an example of members of a stem lineage who gradually went down their own evolutionary path, and all the major stages of this evolution are present in the fossil record. If you want to talk about mutations and how they contribute to differences among various lineages, we can do that. If you want to talk about the observations of natural selection in the Precambrian, we can do that too. If you want to talk about speciation in the Cambrian, there's evidence for that. Most importantly, though, what I really want to know is what you think. I would really like to know the answers to these questions. What do you think happened in the Cambrian radiation? Where do you get your information? From the science literature or from secondary sources reporting on it, perhaps with a separate agenda from just reporting on the evidence? How did you fact check your information? And most critically, what evidence would you require to change your mind? Because if you haven't thought about that, but only have rationalization tools to reject evidence, no matter what it is, then what it is you're doing, it isn't science. You already know my answers to all these questions. You know what I think happened and when. You know where I get my information from the experts who spend their lives studying this event. I fact check my information by comparing multiple articles from separate sources. I investigate how experts respond to each other. Finally, I already documented the evidence that would change my mind. Earlier, I made a specific prediction of what we should expect under design. Now you. It is especially important that you answer these questions. You must think through the implications of your beliefs. Thank you.
All right. And with that, we stop with 6.5 minutes left to go, Jackson. So you made some pretty good time there. Even with a few...
Well, I read it faster than normal.
Oh, well, that's okay. All right. So, Ahmed, I'm going to reset my timer. And why don't you screen share? And then when you're ready, let me know, and I will start your time.
All right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
And
okay. Can you hear the screen now?
Yep, I can see it. We should be good on that end. Can you just change the slides real quick just to make sure that that's working? Because we had a problem with that with Jackson. Yep, that's changed. Yep, it changed. Okay, awesome.
You are not the first person to tell me I'm a problem child.
All right. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right, I will go on your first word.
All right. So first, thank you, Jackson. You made my job easier. So the central piece in my argument is an argument from information. And so the question is, this is a general point of contention that I have with the theory of evolution. When it comes to the unfolding of life from unicellular organisms up to human beings, the big question is, can random mutations and selection do it? But then whenever there's a discussion, there is always the discussion about, you know, this animal had that other precursor, etc. So the Cambrian explosion to me is quite interesting because when you go before it, there is an obvious surge. And the gradual nature of life has a perturbation there. So that's what makes it quite interesting for me. I have already introduced myself. Maybe I didn't mention that I'm a Muslim, if it's not obvious from my name, but so my worldview comes from there. So I've spent my life in engineering, and engineering is especially communications and electronics engineering and information systems has information sitting as its centerpiece. So communications is about conveying information from one place to another, and electronics is about processing this information, and obviously information systems is about making them useful. And to me as an engineer, when I look at nature, whether unicellular, multicellular life, whether plant or animal, those not only look designed, they cannot be but designed. And then the question is, can random mutations and natural selection cause such a great appearance of design? And my answer is no. And why? It is because in engineering, you start by purpose. And you have a purpose for something. I want to move from one place to another, so I start thinking maybe something with a function of a car can do. I start putting in a design. The design involves materials. I think of parts and of an assembly process for those parts. And this whole process is a process of information. So the creator starts by a purpose, and he thinks for functionality to deliver this purpose, he would put design, he would put a parts list, he will put assembly instructions, he will put together the machinery that he needs to assemble these things. He would also put operating instructions. He would then put a law. For example, a car cannot drive around at 200 miles an hour or something. And he will put maintenance instructions. He will also put instructions for disposal and maybe for recycling. And on this slide, I have mapped this into what we see in life. So morphogenesis, DNA, genetic regulatory networks, cell machinery, the kind of download that goes to those creatures. So a bird understands that it's a bird. It knows how to navigate. It knows how to migrate. It knows what it should eat. It knows what it should not eat, even if it hatched away from its parents. God also sends religion to regulate life and to maintain life. He also sets end dates for things. There's things like programmed cell death. And when things die, you do not need to take them to a recycling factory. They just biodegrade. So this is supreme engineering. And these are just top of my head, some of examples of very sophisticated machines that we see in nature, except that they're living machines. Now, information theory says that when you have information, and my basic premise is that life is centered around information, there is an information source. And then you move information. And when you move information, you move it through a channel. And when you have channels, we have what is called noise. And noise degrades information. It doesn't make it better. So when a receiver receives it, it is something like this. You start by, can you see my cursor? So you start by information. It's transmitted, and then there's noise. And noise is like the static that you see on your TV when there's no actual signal. And what you receive on the other side is the signal. Superposed on it is noise. And the father of information theory taught us this. And this is what we learn in communications and electronics engineering. And working with information all the time, there is always data cleansing. If you leave information, it will degrade. You need to do continuous data maintenance. So what really boggles me is that there is a complete theory that tries to explain the origin of life, the origin of species, or how life moved from the first cell forward, with a completely unguided system that is like somebody who's blind driving a car. And even worse, there is nobody at all driving the car, and you expect the car to reach anywhere. And I think this is completely unreasonable, because what it means in terms of information theory is that there is no signal whatsoever. You're only left with the noise. You expect that the noise will give something at the other end, and that thing makes sense. We're talking about very sophisticated information at the other end. We're talking about DNA, we're talking about epigenetics, we're talking about gene regulatory networks, we're talking about a single small cell unfolding into a complete creature. And this, in terms of everything that I have learned in engineering, makes no sense whatsoever. And it cannot start this way, it cannot progress this way. And just as Jackson was explaining about evolution, if random mutations and natural selection are driving this, I'm making 12 predictions. None of them is true. So this has to be false. So very fast, we explain that random mutation and natural selection can explain the major critical transitions of life. It doesn't, of which the novel body plans is something that relates to the Cambrian Explosion. We should expect that this white noise in the background in the form of random mutations does not change its mind, does not suddenly spring about all those new body plans or no phyla, like Jackson was saying. We expect that there is an abundance of evidence for ancestral lineages, which is not the case, especially for the Cambrian Explosion. We expect genetic mechanisms that are prone to error, but what we see is genetic mechanisms that are very redundant and has error correction mechanisms. It doesn't make sense. How does something that's been created by error combats error? We expect that mutations are predominantly beneficial, but beneficial is quite rare. And we expect plenty of DNA that does nothing, while every day unfolds of DNA that's doing things. And we expect that efficiency is not pronounced, but we see very efficient and very sophisticated systems. And human beings is completely something else. Language, intellect, and free will are really a big question mark. So if this random mutation and natural selection as a hypothesis should fly, let's test it with the Cambrian Explosion. So the Cambrian Explosion is this event, like 541 million years ago, where the major phyla, almost everything that we have today, started there. And well, if we accept phyla or we don't, this is one of the things that I have a problem with this theory. So if we're discussing phylogeny, we'll be talking phyla. Now, if there's a problem with phylums, we'll be putting phyla aside. It's quite irritating. This is how it looked like before the Cambrian and the Ediacaran, and things like sitting around. And this is how it looks in the Cambrian. We have animals. And those animals had no match before. There was some shelled things, but nothing like this. And we have a failure to explain 5 things. How come those novel body plans exist? How does those novel phyla hence exist? How come there is this glitch? If this is white noise, you shouldn't expect glitches. And increase in oxygen concentration doesn't seem to explain this very well. This is, to me, a huge infusion of information, and in quite small amount of time. Regardless, it's 11 million years or 25 million years, it doesn't make a difference. It's nothing compared to the age of life. So I'm not a young Earth creationist, by the way, and very few Muslims are. I didn't hear about any. But then, what the theory of evolution propagates all the time, billions and billions of years, hundreds of millions of years. Well, guess what? This is not how it happened. And even if we extend it to the end of the Cambrian, what was not there during the Cambrian also came in. The rest of the phyla were complete. And guess what? Also, after the Cambrian, no new phyla came novel. Very questionable. So, the questions that I would like Jackson to explain to me as a biologist, things like trilobites, things that move, things that have eyes. Now, when you listen to somebody explaining biology, the eye happened like this. It was like something that sees light and dark and this and that. But trilobites that came about in the Cambrian explosion have compound, very sophisticated eyes. How come does that exist? We have locomotion. We have predation. How does this happen in such a short time? Locomotion and predation, aided by eyes and legs and limbs. And the problem is, you need all those new proteins. You need all those new functional specifications for organisms. It hence needs gene regulatory networks. And guess what? Let's assume that for some funny reason, we accept that a leg comes about or an eye comes about. Does that also come with its neural networks and its information, visual information processing? And the animal just happens to understand what an eye is and what it's good for? It's very questionable to me. If I just plug in a USB camera to my laptop without having on the laptop software that is engineered to read video signals, the camera is like complete nonsense. So where does the external information, the operating information, come from? We're not only talking about the genetic information and the information that regulates the genetic information, but also the information that enables the animal to understand that it is an animal, understand its own body parts. This is mind-boggling to me. So the question is, if there is this huge infusion of information, who's transmitting? If at all information theory makes any sense, and I think we are having this conversation because we are working over an information platform. You're receiving my information on the other side because information theory works, because communication and electronics works. So if there is this huge infusion of information, who is transmitting? This is my question. Who is transmitting not only in the Cambrian period or the Cambrian explosion, but all over the place? But okay, we're taking the Cambrian explosion as an example here. So we need information to build the animals. Mutations typically destroy things or make them worse or just the same. And we cannot really invoke so much pre-existing genes here. So if you invoke pre-existing genes, like I would guess you might do,
1 minute.
so if you assume everything was there, so information gradient is what? Everything was there from the beginning? Please explain that. If not, please explain to me who is transmitting the information, where does the information come from, and where does the external information come from? I just would like to note that the testable non-evolutionary mechanisms are okay: genetics, inheritance, epigenetics, breeding, drift, natural and artificial selection, adaptive responses, and even some point mutations are okay. Yeah, but building a complete animal with this kind of information, my final quote is that the belief in random mutation as the driving force for life is disabling real research about how life works and progresses and causing humanity to dwell in a state of mental incapacitation. Thank you.
All right. I think someone's timer is going off.
That's mine, yeah.
Okay.
And this is, by the way, the address of my channel.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So we are going to move on to the open discussion for a while. That is going to take up about a half hour-ish. Hour-ish. That's what I meant. So thank you very much to both of our speakers. I think we will start with Jackson first, since you were the person who spoke least recently. But this is not a timed thing. I am going to keep track of exactly how long people are going, just in case we start to get some excessive rambling, I suppose. So Jackson, why don't you take it away with what you'd like to discuss first for discussion?
Sure, okay. So I had already in essence, presented rebuttals or pointed out that I had slides regarding every topic that Ahmed was going to bring up, because none of this surprised me. And so there were several things in there that I think I'm very curious to know what your response is. So, for instance, if I were to ask you, because there's one really big one that I want to get to, but I want to make a point about this first. How many phyla exist today? Do you know? And you're muted at the moment.
Well, I guess somewhere between 20 and 30.
Sure, that's fair enough. About 34 to 36 is generally considered about that. So yeah. So how many phyla were present in the Cambrian? Do you know?
Well, I think all of them were there during the Cambrian. We had like 4 before that. But
Let me rephrase that. Do you know how much evidence from fossils do we have for, or how many phyla represented by fossils that track all the way back to the Cambrian? Do you know?
Not really. Maybe to the Cambrian Explosion, I think we'll have like 6 or 7. By the end of the Cambrian, we have the whole lot, I think.
So,
before the Cambrian, we had like 3 or 4.
Okay, so close enough. Sure, yeah, we have several that track before, 3 or 4. We have about 20 that are represented actually over the entirety of the Cambrian, not necessarily going all the way back to the start. And there are about what was it? There are, what is it? There are 9 or so, I think it's 9, which have 8. Okay. There are 8 phyla for which we have no fossil records whatsoever. Right? And so they don't track back. They don't track back to the Cambrian. And so actually one of them, interestingly enough, that's the bryophytes, track back to the Ordovician, and there is very good evidence that actually they originated in the Ordovician. So actually there is an example of a phylum that originated after the Cambrian. Not just after the Cambrian explosion itself at the very beginning, but actually after the entirety of the Cambrian. That's all. I just wanted to point that out. So I think that's kind of a significant point. But also, what I really want to focus on is the information argument, because intelligent design people wax poetic about information all day, but I don't think they have any way to apply it. So, if, for example, let me share my screen again. Present the window. Yeah, okay. So if I were to show you the chart on the left, which has deuterostomes, can you tell which has the most information of all of those, or do they all have the same amount of information? Or how do you define information in terms of Hox genes, which is what these are? These are representing homologous Hox genes across deuterostomes. So how do you quantify information in these animals?
Okay, so let me be very clear about this. It is very obvious, all right? And I am fine that you give me any of the 2 answers, okay? Because the problem with the theory of evolution, I mean, in terms of universal common ancestry with modification by random mutation, the problem with this thing is that it is incoherent. So I don't have a problem if we at least have a coherent theory. So one line of answer would be every piece of information that was there in the Cambrian explosion or in the Cambrian altogether, doesn't make a difference, was already there in the Ediacaran, and then please prove it.
I don't hold that position.
And then if that is the case, then it means that the information gradient is reversed. It means the more we go back, information is increasing. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yes, which is why I don't hold that position.
Since you don't hold that position, let's go to the next one. And the next one is that information is increasing as life unfolds. So obviously, I do not think we cannot find, in terms of the core building blocks of information, a better example than the Cambrian explosion. maybe the Ordovician can also be a candidate in terms of the number of animals, maybe. But in terms of body plans, in terms of things that we didn't have any living precursor for, I'm talking about animals that can see and can move and can run after its prey and others that are escaping them. So if we, at least for the Cambrian explosion, do not acknowledge that we have designs for eyes and for legs and for shells and for armor and for this and that and for novel body plans, that we had things like Dickinsonia, things like sitting on the ground, hopeless. We had
Dickinsonia could actually move.
Yeah, I mean,
we have trace fossil evidence that Dickinsonia, as well as Kimberella and Eulingia and various other Ediacaran organisms, could move.
So hold on a second. Jackson, if I remember your question
but also
correctly,
you didn't answer my.
Give me a second. Yeah.
Question.
So if I remember correctly, the question was if you could go back a slide. Well, give me a second.
Well, actually,
Jackson, could you go back a slide a second?
Well, this one also asks the same question. Can you apply your concept of information to this? Can you tell me which has more information? If you're looking at here, this top left chart right here, which has Tardigrada, Arthropoda, Onychophora, which has more information?
Can you go full screen? Because it's really small in my... Can you go full screen?
Yeah, let me try that. Can you see it better?
You might have to change which window you're sharing,
yeah,
Jackson, when you do that.
Pick up the display window or something
Am I not sharing the...
No.
No.
Hold on. Okay, well, let me try that again then. Okay, so let's present a window. Actually, hold on. Let me just share the whole screen. Then maybe that'll work.
Yeah.
Okay, share and... Okay, can you see it now?
It's still... Oh, there it is. Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
That's better. That's better.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Some of these some of the ones I have on here also have very small text, and I do apologize for that, but I can't really make them larger given that it's a slide. But my question is, again, if you're looking at the top left chart, which has Tardigrada, Arthropoda, Onychophora, which has more information and which doesn't, which has less, and how do you tell? What is your metric, and apply it to this example, please?
Okay, so what is my metric is none of what is on the screen.
Well, that's the problem.
My metric would be that the amount of information when you're looking at something is measured by the thing, by the result of what this information manifests. So if you're showing me a drawing for the Empire State and a drawing for a hut, all right, obviously one will produce the Empire State and one will produce a hut. Then the Empire State has more information. But if you look and if you tell me this is for example the genetic composition of a tardigrade and for an arthropod, which has more information, I do not know, because essentially we don't even know if the whole information that builds an organism is all in DNA or not. We don't know that.
Ahmed, that's kind of the debate over then. That the debate is over at that point, because if you have no metric for, if you're going to talk to me about, well, we have information in cars and in airplanes and Empire State Buildings, but then I show you a single picture and you tell me, well, I can't apply information, then you don't have an argument. That's it. That's the whole game. It's over now. That's it.
I have an argument. Does a trilobite has more information or a Dickinsonia in your opinion? Because
Depends.
one of them
we can't look at the genes of either of them.
One of them moves by being very fluffy, and one of them has legs and eyes and shell and internal organs, etc.
I would say they have different information that is applied in different ways, but I don't think there's such a thing. There's the concept of having more or less information is also a kind of nonsensical argument, because there are algae, there are amoebas that have 4 times as many genes as we do. Would you say an amoeba is more complex than a human? Does it have more information than us?
Because you have now gone
yes or
back. No, a human has more information, of course.
But they have 4 times as many genes as us. So clearly they have more information than we do.
Because who says that number of base pairs is the measure for information.
Well,
Who says
Jackson,
that?
Jackson
That's
didn't say that.
precisely my point. That's precisely my point. There is no measure. It's an arbitrary construct which is used to make what sounds like a really good argument. The whole information argument sounds really good until you realize you can't actually apply it to anything. And then as soon as you can't, that's it. We can talk about what genes do. In this example, here we have a set of Hox genes, OTD, LAB, HOX3, etc. And they do things in these organisms. Now, each of these organisms, tardigrades, arthropods, onychophorans, share these genes. Now, what I'm not going to say is that they have all the same genes. Like you said, I'm not making that argument. They have a core set of regulatory genes which pre-existed them, which was in the common panarthropod ancestor, but it did not have all the genes that tardigrades, arthropods, and onychophorans later had or later developed. Okay, I'm not making that argument. So my point here is you can't really talk about information if you have no metric, no way to define it. You got to move on to something else.
No, you don't. Why? As an engineer, if you show me a bicycle and you show me a car, it doesn't take that much. You don't need a PhD in engineering to understand that a car has more information than a bicycle.
Okay, a car does not reproduce with inherent variations.
No, do you accept a car has more information than a bicycle?
There are more parts in a car. Are you defining information as parts? And so if that's the case, how do you quantify parts? How do you quantify types of organelles or of body structures? There has to be a way to quantify this in terms of organisms.
I'm giving you an extreme example because then it's a coarse example. So you don't need to go into the nitty-gritty, okay? So if you're looking at, it will go again to the same question. Does a trilobite have more information than Dickinsonia or not? This is the question.
So there is different information that is operating in different ways. The question, again, as I already said, is nonsensical. It's nonsensical to talk about it this way.
No, let me again, I don't have a problem that you give not only any of two answers, but even any of three answers here, okay? So if you tell me that the Dickinsonia had all the information, then
no.
We have an inverted information gradient, and it doesn't make sense. So you don't.
And I already said no to that. Okay, yep.
The second one, you will tell me, well, Dickinsonia has a different set of information, which means there's novel information in the trilobite. Please tell me,
yes,
where did that novel information come from?
Do you see this chart that I'm showing you? Do you see this chart that I'm showing you? Do you see the differences? What are the differences between these organisms?
There is the third position, I'll just complete the point. So the third position would be that you tell me, well, the information was there, but it is manifested in a different way, which somebody might say. But then I would tell you that the manifestation of the information itself is information, because it gives instructions, like you give instructions of how to use electronic components to build an electronic circuit. The components are the same. But you cannot claim that a TV is the same as a laptop. It is the same electronic components, but the design, the epigenetic thing, the GRN thing is different. So this is also information. So my question is, all this huge infusion of information, regardless which position you take, where is it coming from? This is a very simple and straight question.
Do you see the chart that I am showing you?
Which one? Which part of it?
Well, look at the top left again.
Okay.
What is the difference between them? What are the differences? Let me rephrase that. What are the differences between each of the organisms pictured in the chart?
Here I think you're showing.
So you see these little.
This is segmentation of body, yeah.
Yes, these little. You see these little colorful lines here?
Yeah.
So the little colorful lines are representing where the Hox genes, which are at the top of the chart, are being expressed. So, as you can see, in this case, they're not developing whole new sets of genes for their differences. These are different. They're not genetically closely related, and you can test them. But they're expressing many of the very same genes, but differently. This is a well-known phenomenon in biology. It's called deep homology. We share genes, right? This is something that came out in the 80s. It's called with the fruit fly or the fly experiment, where they took the PAX6 from the mouse and transferred it to the fly, and they caused it to express an eye. Right, exactly. So the concept of deep homology is not new by any means. Now, did some genes originate later? Yes, absolutely. But what I'm arguing is that the quote body plans, which are what you or how you define a quote phylum, are not coming from huge major novel gene formations. They're coming from largely reorientation, changing where you express certain genes, the Hox genes. This, as you can see, is what's happening. This is why they're different.
Well, Jackson, I just would like to note to you that this is the beauty of the Cambrian. That there are things, because when you put things, beside each other, which has, differences that are generated by Hox genes, please tell me, where did the eye come from? Because there was, where did the eye come from between the Ediacaran and the Cambrian?
So, while that is a...
Which Hox gene in the Ediacaran used to express a compounded eye? Because we're not here talking about a fly that already has Hox genes for a leg and an eye, and we're instructing the regulatory networks to put a leg instead of an eye part. We're not doing that, or put an eye on the hind side of the fly. We're not doing that. We're looking at no eye versus eye. And this is the beauty of the Ediacaran, because the information infusion is very obvious on the most complex structures of life. And
well, we've been asking that same question for a while. So, Jackson, you had a question, and there was a question for you. So I think you can fairly quickly answer the eye question, and we'll go back to your question.
So we can go to the eye question. That's fine. The answer. So. For starters, I want to point out he did not answer my question about genes, because I
agree.
He wouldn't, because it's not just him, it's all of intelligent design as well as young earth creationists have no metric for information. Now we can talk about the mathematical information, that's one thing, but talking about information of biological context is something totally different, and you did not respond to it at all. However, you want to go to eyes, we can do that. Again, I prepared for that in advance because I'm familiar with Steve Meyer's arguments. He makes the exact same arguments. So here's a slide. You guys can see it, right?
Yes.
Arthropod evolution?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this slide here about arthropod evolution describes the evolution of arthropods. So as you can see at the very bottom, we have Eulingia. Eulingia lived in the Ediacaran. Now, the thing about eyes, which is kind of interesting, which is something you said earlier, is that eye is a kind of term where there are shades of gray. How do you define eye? Because there are Archaeans, right, which use rhodopsin merely to detect light. And the reason for this is they say, they tell themselves, quote, okay, when my rhodopsin is detecting light, my little rhodopsin membrane protein, I'm going to do this one metabolic process, and when my rhodopsin tells me there is no light, I'm going to do this other metabolic process. There is no neural network required. Likewise, there is no neural network required for any of the, quote, eyes that exist in various lineages of algae, which tell them, hey, light's coming from that direction, I'm going to grow that way. There is no neural network there. Same for Euglena, same for Chlamydomonas, whatever. Loads of organisms have eyes and don't have nerves. That's just a fact. Now, the other thing about this is, here you have I put this in a particular way because I wanted to show the evolution of arthropods and how it is a nested hierarchy. Eulingia is a panarthropod. It nests somewhere around the base of the lineage that includes tardigrades, arthropods, and onychophorans. But it doesn't have limbs. It has no limbs. But it has these trilobe segments, which is how it was identified as a member of the panarthropods. Aishaya, I think is how you pronounce that. I have no idea. It's got a lot of syllables.
Too
However,
many vowels in a row. Too
has-
many vowels.
far too many vowels. Exactly. It's like all but two. So yeah, way too many vowels. It has repeating limb segments. So this nests around the base from the phylogenies I've seen around the base of the divide between oncophorans and arthropods. And then Opabinia has compound eyes, and it nests pretty firmly within the arthropods. So as you can see, it is a series of steps. Both Elingia and Aishaya would have had very rudimentary photoreceptors, and later, arthropods actually developed, or stem arthropods developed eyes. These are stepwise occurring structures. They didn't occur all at once. What do you make of that, Ahmed? Sorry.
Well, I make of that the chart on the screen does not describe the evolution of an eye. It says that one of them has segments, the other one has limbs. The top two have Hugh's head shield, and the one before has joint limbs, and one of them has compounded eyes.
No,
So
four of them have compound eyes.
Oh,
So
I
it's-
mean,
it's
that's that you're
trilobes.
right. So where do you have this gradient of eye? And by eye, I don't mean an eye spot. I don't mean a photocell. I don't mean a chemical reaction. An eye is an eye. It is something that captures light and forms an image, and this image goes to a brain, and the brain interprets this image and takes actions based on identifying shapes. This is what an eye is, and what an eye is involves at least 4 levels of sophisticated information: designing the eye, designing the system that would interpret the neurosignals coming from the eye, identifying shapes, which needs sophisticated neural networks. It's just not reflecting what's coming in terms of an image into electrical signals, but you need something like a neural network that when it sees a worm, it's a worm. When it sees an algae, it's a plankton. It knows what this is.
Okay,
And on top
so-
of that, you need the external information, the extra information to tell the animal that it has an eye and that an eye is used for vision.
Okay, we get the question.
This is
we
information.
Ahmed, we get the question. Jackson?
Yeah.
So, as I already said, PAX6 is in the common ancestor of all bilaterians. Fruit flies, mice, elephants. So this gene was already present in our ancestors as well as in the ancestor of the panarthropods. Now, what you're asking me to do is show you the evolution in the fossil record of a soft organ, right? Which is pretty hard, considering we have several phyla which don't exist in the fossil record simply because they're small, soft organisms. But what you want me to do is provide you the step by step of not of the arthropods, which I have provided you here. I provided you a successive set of organisms with structure with these this increasingly exclusive group developing structures over time. Rather, you want me to provide you with the fossil record of eyes. Now, I can provide you with papers describing the evolution of compound eyes and things, but I'm sure your response will be, but what about the information, or why isn't this in the fossil record? But this is more of a taphonomic artifact rather than, or taphonomic argument rather than...
Let me tell you, I picked an eye, but I could have picked so many examples from the Cambrian. So you have digestive systems in the Cambrian. You have internal organs.
Again, something else soft
So
that wouldn't fossilize.
Digestive system. How do you get something like mouth parts with digestive system, digestive tract, and an anus, and all of this working all together without real precursors? So the question is, there is obvious change in life. There is obvious.
What do you mean by no real precursors? Because I provided you with several.
Where is a digestive system? Where does an eye come from? So, like the example that you said for the eye, is it fair to say that an eye spot in an algae, it has nothing to do with an eye? This is a photosensor that reacts, the chemical reaction that says on and off or shades of light is nothing like an eye. Eye sees
Well, then you would have
shape.
Okay, but you would have to say that's the case for a lot of animals too. So then you would arbitrarily be excluding a lot of animals in that definition.
What do you mean by that?
You know, there are lots of animals that their photoreceptors, their primitive eyes, whatever, only detect differences in light, right? Like scallops and starfish, things like that. So you would say they don't have eyes.
So this goes to the three options that I've given you. So if you have a precursor that has a full eye, and then you have something that has a degraded eye, I wouldn't mind. But if you have nothing and then you have an eye, I need to understand, where does this come from? If you have something that is very primitive, things that are absorbing minerals from the ocean, and then you have a full digestive system, as an engineer, a digestive system is a very sophisticated thing. Where does it come from?
All right,
where do joint limbs come
I
from?
think there might be some talking past each other, especially with the eye thing. So I'm going to ask a few questions. I want to see if we can hone in on what counts as an eye, so that maybe we can talk about that. So flatworms have a couple eye spots on their head that just detect light or dark. They don't have any image-forming capacity. Ahmed, is that an eye?
But flatworms are not in the lineage of arthropods.
Okay, but is that an eye?
It is something that detects light. It is not an eye in the definition that we are. If we define an eye as something that sees
no,
shapes,
it's not.
then this is not an eye.
Okay, so
Because we asked to define an eye, so we are contextually defining an eye now as something that sees shapes.
Okay.
You know, it would give the organism an idea about the 3D environment it is moving in.
So the pinhole camera type quote unquote eye of a cuttlefish, no, it's cuttlefish. Sorry,
Nautilus.
Nautilus. That's what I'm going for. It doesn't have a lens. There's no indication of color sensing, but it probably can form images. That's an eye.
If it forms images, I'm fine. If it sees images in black and white, I'm fine.
Okay, so
But if you're starting with something like a compounded eye that looks to be more sophisticated, but at least you have an eye that's connected to a neural nerve, it goes to a brain, and the thing knows that it's seeing.
Okay, so are you asking for a transition from something like the flatworm eye spot to at least that point?
We were in a blind world called the Ediacaran, and then we have things that see, and seeing is, you know, a hell of an engineering problem.
So Jackson, do we have any transitional forms between something like eye spots getting to at least a pinhole type eye?
So I think the way he phrased it is kind of misleading, because that being able to detect light is the intermediate. If you don't have an eye, if you have an eye that can detect light, you are at an advantage compared to someone who has no way to detect light at all. That's already an advantage. Now, if you can form like I believe it's flatworms can form like very, very poor images, you are at a slightly better advantage, right?
I don't mind, except that flatworms are not on the lineage of arthropods. So how come you have? It's even a compounded eye.
So the point.
Can I just show my screen again?
Yes.
You're right. Arthropods have compound eyes, as I just showed. But the point that I'm trying to make is, if it exists, if there is an organism which exists that has at least a partial ability to form pictures, right? Then, per like Darwin's own argumentation, if that exists currently, then it probably existed in the lineage. Something with very poor vision forming capabilities existed in their lineage, and compound eyes evolved later. Now, on the whole, this argument,
I mean, as a biologist and a paleontologist, or you know about, we're here for the Cambrian Explosion. So, how much time and how many, I don't know, thousands and millions of, I don't know, of random mutations would take to design something like this sitting on the screen now? Because
I don't think it would take either. I don't think it would take millions, for one thing, but also the point that I was getting to was this whole argument about, well, when exactly did eyes form, and why can't we see in the fossil record? This is what my friend RJ likes to call the Bermuda Triangle defense. It's, let's take something that we probably know we won't find in the fossil record because it's soft or tiny or whatever, and let's make that our argument, or it's sort of like God of the gaps. Because as I showed you, you didn't really make an argument with regard to information. And as I also showed during my slideshow, we have a gradual origination of different groups in the Cambrian.
Do we have a fossil for the eye of the trilobite, or we don't?
We don't have fossils of rotifers predating the Eocene. Does that mean rotifers didn't exist prior to the Eocene?
We have,
exactly.
We have a trilobite and we have an eye on it. So if we had other things that had eyes on it, we should see that those things had eyes on them, shouldn't we?
Well, as I said, Ishaya and Eulingia both had photoreceptors, but they did not have the compound eyes. But they're in the lineage to arthropods. So is that not important? Or were they separate creations?
A photoreceptor is not an eye. A photoreceptor is like a chemical receptor, is like a receptor for anything. So you have chloroplasts, right, in cyanobacteria, billions of years before that.
Eyes are just chemical
converts
receptors,
light into energy, right? So are you telling me that if something, for example, you have flagella that track gradients of sugar in water, right? So is that something that is exactly the same, for example, like a mass spectrometer that does chemical analysis to something that's sitting on a star?
So do you know what an eye does? Do you know what an eye does?
There is a...
Ahmed, do you know what an eye does?
I happen to.
Okay, what does it do?
Because I'm an...
When light enters your eye, what does it do? What is the first step that happens when light enters your eye?
So you have this thing, you have your rods, my eye, you have your rods and cones, right?
And so what happens when light hits a rod or a cone?
Let him answer.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ahmed.
I'm sorry?
I was telling Jackson to let you answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you will have a reaction that will then convey that as a chemical message into your neurons, that will go to a certain part into your brain, that will form a digital image that is then translated into a 3D shape. And these are all levels of design. So my question now is, and there's before that all the optical machinery. This is an integrated system, and integrated systems, for you to build an integrated system, you see that movie about the car driven by a blind man. For you to build an integrated system, you need to have an objective, which is building the system, and you know the parts, and you know how to assemble it, and you need the information to operate it, and you need the mechanism that will understand the information generated from it. This is something that, number one, never ever have been seen to arise by chance. And number two, please show me the gradient if there is any. And number three, if it is there on the trilobite, and we can know it is there on the trilobite, why can't we see it on anything else? And number four, there has not been that much billions and billions of years of time to do this in the gradient that is proposed by evolutionary theory. And this is not the only novel functional system that has came into being in the Cambrian. There's plenty of them. I just pointed out for 3. So why should evolutionary theory grab to the idea that things are coming about by random mutation and natural selection, random mutation that is completely
all right? Well, let's let Jackson answer.
Okay. So you've got several different things which are kind of several misconceptions which are kind of all lying on top of each other. And the first, to go back to the question that I asked earlier, I asked you, what does an eye do? There was a very specific reason I asked you that. The eye, when light comes through and hits your rods and cones, it initiates a series of phosphorylation cascades, right?
Yeah.
Your eye is a chemical receptor of a sort. It detects light rather than a particular molecule. If we're looking at Archaeans, and they have this rhodopsin molecule, we also have rhodopsin instead of a different kind though. They are using light to initiate a series of phosphorylation cascades. Now we provided you with examples of this trend of what are intermediate stages, but I think you misunderstand why this is important. In evolutionary theory, in like literally the very first book on evolution, Origin of Species, one of the things Darwin talks about is, while we don't have a great fossil record of the eye, and again, why would we? It's a soft, squishy thing. We can observe intermediates alive today. If an intermediate exists today, it lives, it exists, right? It fulfills a niche. That means, theoretically, it could also exist in the past, right? Because it lives today. It could also exist in the past. And so if that intermediate exists, then we have reason to believe that this thing evolved. Because it's not all or nothing. We have steps along the way. Does that make sense?
So
But also,
yeah.
there's also one other thing I want to point out. Before you answer that, one other thing I want to point out. My inability to show the evolution of the eye in the fossils, which, granted, it really doesn't have much of a bearing on the Cambrian at all. On the whole of the Cambrian explosion. I can't show you that stomach evolved via fossils either. I can't show you any rotifers before the Eocene. Does that mean there was no evolution of rotifers? Does that mean they didn't share a common ancestor with other organisms? No. This is kind of a God of the gaps argument, or as I said, the Bermuda Triangle defense. But it doesn't bear on the overall point, which is kind of what I want to get back to. It's the overall point. It's not, well, I can't show you an eye, therefore, or I can't show you the fossil record of the eye, therefore evolution is moot. Do you recognize that, at least?
Okay, so what I am saying is that an eye is one example, but there are many. But I would like to answer your question first. So, if you say that an eye, at its ground level, is a chemical reaction, well, so is everything in a living thing, because at the end, it's biochemistry in action, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So it goes back to the same example. It goes back to the same example that I have pre-programmed into my presentation. Let's say. Every single electronic gadget is made of exactly the same electronic components. So if you look at what you have in your laptop and what you have in your TV and what you have in your smartwatch and what you have in your mobile and so and so and so, they're all at the end transistors and resistors and capacitors and coils, etc., and some conductors. All right. So saying that things are at the basic level chemical, it solves nothing. You're just saying that the basic building blocks are the same. So what? Yeah, everything is at the end cells, and cells are made of membranes and biochemicals. This is not the answer. The answer is that for you to build a new machine, all right, there is a completely novel design. It depends on what the function of that machine is. All right. So if the majority of the components that are on a screen are also in a camera, it doesn't make a screen a precursor to a camera. They are completely two different artifacts. So let's be, yeah. So a radio is not a TV. You invented a radio in a completely different path than a TV, regardless that both had bulbs. You know, it's irrelevant. And my problem, Jackson, with the theory is that there is a consistent and persistent level of gripping in the theory that the only explanation has to be random mutation and natural selection for anything novel that's coming there.
It doesn't.
Well, actually. On the ground, you cannot prove it because the other things are okay.
Okay, hold on.
Drift
Jackson,
and
is that the position of
okay.
Is that the position of modern evolutionary biology?
No, it's not actually, and that's why I mentioned in my opening when I say mutation and natural selection, as well as the other mechanisms, because mutation and natural selection are not and have not for like 70 years been the only mechanisms of evolution, nor are they the only mechanisms of novelty, and this is just not right. And it has not been right for a long time. So
I agree that they're not, but if you say that they are in action, you will have to presume the information there. Then you go to position one that you have already rejected.
Look,
if you say that the information was not there, you need to invoke mutation to create it. And then the question is, where does the information come from? So the problem is, we go with the theory. It takes this position when we're discussing that thing, and it takes completely the opposite position when we're discussing the other thing. And it's really not fair, because if
Ahmed,
you want to be seen as realism, you have to be coherent, right?
All right,
So
I want to hear from Jackson.
I'm not taking contradictory positions. I'm not really sure what you mean by that. What I'm telling you is we have one. You have picked out one feature, or like you said, you could pick out a bunch. You could pick out a bunch of features. We could do this all day. Is what's a feature which the transitions of which are not present in the fossil record? That has no bearing on evolutionary theory whatsoever, just at all. If we can't find the evolution of the heart in the fossil record, does that mean hearts didn't evolve? No, we have living members to compare against. But again, the point that
the theory.
The what?
I just want to make a point that I want to make a point here that the theory is there to explain the origin of species, right? So if it cannot explain anything about the origin of species, what is the standing of the theory?
You are trying to conflate two vastly different positions with that statement. Both you're saying, oh, if you can't explain the origin of species, which is one topic, and again, I said I'm happy to discuss that with you, but you did also have a whole discussion with Dapper on that. Then it can't explain anything. Which no, these are vastly different positions. Also, again, you keep coming back to information. We already demonstrated you can't define information in any way that is relevant to living organisms. If you can't do that, you have no argument to build upon the concept of information. None whatsoever. Here again is another chart. If you can't do it, if you can't define information, you can't use it as your argument.
I will
go ahead
to that again, but because I thought that I already responded to it, and you're saying that
you
I didn't. So let's make sure that we are.
Because remember when I had this chart and I asked you. Remember when I brought up this chart and I asked you, if I can make it large again, which of these has more information, which has less, and how do you know? How do you quantify information in this context? And you gave no answer. You kept jumping around to different things, but you never responded to this. So if you have the answer now.
Yeah, I did have it before, but maybe you missed it. So let me say it again. When you are looking at something that has physical presence, all right, and you are looking at the drawing of that thing, okay? So I give you a drawing of a car, and I give you a drawing of a bicycle.
Okay.
Again,
hold on.
which one has more information? I
Ahmed.
didn't respond to that.
You need to.
Ahmed,
can you answer the question?
We need to quantify structures. If you're talking about structures, you need to quantify structures. I said that earlier. You did not respond to it. So again, I'm asking you, if you want to quantify information in terms of structures, which is fine, we can do that. That's okay. You have to have a metric. What is the metric?
We have a great metric, okay?
What is it in terms of organisms, not in terms of cars or airplanes or skyscrapers?
Yeah,
what is it for organisms?
Go ahead and make the most compressed structural description of a trilobite and tell me if that description will involve writing down more design blueprints and more words than you would for a Dickinsonian.
If I, again, I said this already.
Let me tell you why am I reverting to that, and I'm not really seeing what you're presenting on the screen as a basis here. It is because the level of human ignorance to the reality of how genetic and epigenetic material and the networks that control them really work on the ground is not making us in any position whatsoever to judge based on genetic composition.
You keep
because
saying epigenetic. I don't think you know what that means.
Yeah, because we do not know how to quantify the information at the foundation level that you are seeing here. But we can understand and quantify the level of information according to morphology. A more complex morphological structure,
which is what
obviously manifest. And just as I'm telling you, look at the.
Can you give me an example?
Count the systems.
All right.
Count the systems of the trilobite. Count the parts, count the functional specifications of them, and count the same for the Dickinsonia, and tell me which one has more information. It's very simple.
How do you? Okay,
Just
how do you
like
propose
describing
that
a car.
Let's let
If
Jackson.
I show you,
Let's let Jackson ask.
if I show you, for instance, this chart, this top left chart is. Do you count two separate things or one thing? For example, the head region. Is it different for every one of them? Because they're all different. Or well, sorry, for the second region. For the second region, is it?
You're already showing me segmented animals. You're already showing me things that have gone to that level of development. I am not comparing those together.
Okay,
I'm comparing
hold
a
up.
precursor thing.
Ahmed.
You see?
Ahmed.
Yeah.
I am not going to allow people to that blatantly shift the goalpost. That is not okay. We know that we are already at segmentation. We are trying to find out whether or not you have a metric for information with any given group of organisms. You don't get to shift the goalpost to say, well, how do we get to this group? We want to find out if you have an objective method. Please answer that question.
Yeah. We are not discussing information comparison between peers in the same period, which is the Cambrian. We are discussing whether there is information infusion or not between the Ediacaran and the Cambrian. This is very clear.
That's not what I asked you. That is not what I asked you. I asked for like the 5th time, how do you quantify information? Can you look at this chart here, top left? Can you quantify each one? How many parts does each one have? Can you tell me that?
Just from looking at this chart, I can't. But if you give me 2 exact creatures, okay, with a full specification of the creature, give me a worm and a bee or whatever other arthropod that you mean here. And then we can put together how many cell types, how many tissues, how many organs, what are the functional specifications of each of them, etc., make a full definition, a full engineering descriptor for each of those according to the best of our knowledge. And then we can likewise, just the same way we will judge if a Dickinsonia versus a trilobite, which of them has more information. We can do that for any 2 other animals. It's okay, except that between a Dickinsonia and a trilobite, the gap is so huge, we will never disagree about it. But between an ant and a bee, we might disagree. I do not know. Between an ant and a snake, I don't know. We might or we might not. It depends how much we know about both of them.
Will you give me 1 second? Hold on, I need to grab a book off the shelf. 1 second. Yeah. 1 second. This is gonna take me a second.
Are you gonna bring 2 animals?
Maybe he will bring 2 animals. He has a lot in that room.
I think. Is he gonna bring his cat?
Well, so I know Jackson has a cat, and he has 4 fish tanks in there, so there might be some animals.
Yeah, because this will be counted as animal testing.
Also, Dapper, I want to ask, how much time do we have left in this segment?
This segment has about 12 minutes left.
Okay, well, I just want to... Let me see if I can find it.
It's a little less, but...
Talk amongst yourselves.
So, Ahmed, do you have a number and a unit that you could apply to information in biological terms? I'm just curious.
No, I don't.
Okay.
No.
Do you see why that might be a concern for people looking at your argument to say he can't put numbers to a thing that he wants to say he can compare in terms of quantity? Like if I say, I have more...
I found it.
Oh, there we go, Jackson.
I found it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned cell types. Now, I agree with you. Cell types are... Actually, I don't know why I'm still screen sharing. I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Cell types are quantifiable, right? So we have the same number of cell types as... We have the same number of cell types as a trout, right? So is there more information in us than in trouts? And how do you know?
Well, I think you have obliterated my argument there. So I said you will need to go into a hierarchical way. Yeah, you start with cell types, you go into tissues, you go into organs, you go into systems. You write down the functional specifications of the systems, and after that, you have a full descriptor of the creature. That's how you'll do it.
Okay,
So maybe two creatures have the same cell type, but they have different number of organs and different numbers of systems. And those systems will have more functional specifications. And then the one that has more information. This is how I would propose it, until the day comes that we really understand where the information about the morphology, how morphogenesis really happens, and then we have a grip on how this information is really stored and where, and then we can have a different measure. But today, because of our ignorance, we have to judge on morphology. This is the only way, as an engineer, this is the only way I see it. And I'll give you an example from engineering in a minute.
Well,
if you give me a car and you want me to reverse engineer it, and a bicycle and you want me to reverse engineer it, for sure, I will have more functional and engineering specifications to go back to the original information of engineering for the car than the bicycle.
All right, let's have Jackson respond.
Okay, so for one thing, you keep coming back to there's a difference between trilobites and Dickinsonia, and I am not disputing that. They are different organisms. But also, as I pointed out, there is a transition going on here. Let me screen share again. You have more. Yes, one sec. Let me reopen that. You have more, and I know the screen is. I know this text is very small, and I do apologize for that. But as you can see on the left, down here at the bottom left, you have soft-bodied organisms, right? You have solely soft-bodied organisms.
My eyesight is getting bigger, Jackson.
Okay, yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is, so you
just describe it. Just describe it. It's okay.
Well, okay. So the point I'm trying to make is, can you see the purple lines down at the bottom left?
Yeah.
At the bottom left. Okay, so there's purple lines. Then there are red, or kind of orangish, brownish lines sort of to the right of it, and then there are blue lines, which may be difficult to see, and I can understand that, to the right of that. So the point that this is making is, one thing, yes, there are differences between Dickinsonia and trilobites. There's also a difference in time. The soft-bodied ediacaran organisms precede the hard-bodied organisms. In fact, you can see there is the soft-bodied ones, then the organic walled ones. They're not quite hard yet, but they're getting there. And then you have the ones who actually have hard parts, and they occur later. As I mentioned in my intro, this really looks like an evolutionary sequence. Unless you want to argue that there were successive creation events going on here, which I guess you could, but that would seem very arbitrary. But so I have to ask you, where was the event? Where was the creation event? What is the time that the creation event occurred?
I think we might as well move to that question of yours, because I think we have gone through the information thing, and I trust I made my point.
Oh, yeah,
and if I make it again, I will be repeating. So you asked me, what is the alternative? So the alternative that I am putting is threefold. Yeah. Do you want to hear me out on this answer?
I'm not really asking about No, I'm not asking for a comprehensive alternative. I'm asking for a very specific answer to the question I just asked. Because looking at this, given the events,
question. Can you bring the slide where you made the question?
It should still be up. Can you guys not see it?
I can see the chart. Can you repeat the question?
You had a slide. You had a slide where you had a question to me.
This is it. This is the slide. This is the slide I want to ask a question about right here. It says diversity in the Cambrian continued, right? Okay, so the question that I want to ask is, where in the timeline of the Cambrian did the design event take place? When? What time period did it take place?
Yeah, so I was referring actually to the last slide in where you were asking me, but it's the same question anyway. So my answer, this is my answer. So it doesn't need to be right, but it's my answer at least. So my answer is like this, and this is obviously coming from my worldview, right? And the worldview is that we see information being infused.
Ahmed, you need to give a time frame. I need your next sentence to be a time frame, not something about information, not something about your worldview. You need to give me something in millions of years ago.
How many million years? Yes.
We're gonna
How many
be
millions
in
years ago did
time
this
frame-
happen?
We're going to be in the time frame faster than you think, because the time frame, in my opinion, is that there is a continuous transmission of information from the creator of this universe.
Okay, Ahmed, I have muted you because I need you to
What?
start answering the question that has been asked.
I don't know what that means.
Ahmed, the next words need to be a number followed by a unit of time. Otherwise, we're just going to go to questions and answers. So please.
3.8 billion years.
3.8 billion years ago. Okay.
Yeah, no, 3.8 billion
You said
years.
3.8 billion years ago?
3.8 billion years of continuous creation.
So there is no one creation event.
Holy crap.
This is a theistic worldview, a deistic worldview. God did not just create the world and let go, in my opinion. Because the evidence that we see is that information transmission is a continuous process, and he picks when to level up or down that kind of information transmission. And there is no other explanation for what is seen in the fossil record. If there is, I would like to know it. But I don't.
Given
my
that
point of view, there isn't. I'd be wrong. I might be wrong.
Given that response, do you think like speciation events naturally happen, or do you think those are independent divine events?
Okay, so you want a medium answer on that?
Well,
Yeah, let's
see,
get an
my
answer on
point
that,
in
and then
asking
we're going
this,
to
and
go. Well, let's
I
get
realize,
that, and
yeah, I
we're
realize we're
going
about to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realize
Yeah.
we're about to end with this section, so I'm just curious if you think speciation events are independent divine events.
No. Speciation event.
But why?
Speciation events that are like finch beaks changing, hence changing the calls, hence or changing some colors, or some changing being nocturnal versus being daytime bird, etc. If you're talking about this kind of speciation event, no, those are adaptive mechanisms, responses to changes in the environment, and God programs that so that creatures can live and adapt. This happens all the time.
Okay, so
but things like what we see in the Cambrian, where there is an information infusion that cannot be explained, but external information coming, this is information transmission. It's very clear.
All right, we're going to have to switch over to Jackson. Sorry,
given that,
Jackson. Sorry.
But I have a speciation event in the Cambrian.
That's great, but we have some time limits that, by the way, you asked for, Jackson.
No questions.
Yes.
Tell them to go away.
We're doing questions. Our first question. Now, I will say, most of these questions so far have been for Ahmed. In fact, that might be all of them. So if anyone has questions specifically for Jackson, please let me know, and I will make sure that they are interspersed between the other questions. So remember, what I'm going to say is the person to whom the question is asked gets the first response. The other person can get, a quick, try to keep it under a minute response. Then the original person to whom it was asked can have their last few words, and we go on to the next one. There's no doubling back and forth. We do have a quick super chat from No Last Name, which is not a question, but he says, last time I checked, I could be wrong is not a good debate tactic. Facepalm. Thank you very much for your generous super chat, No Last Name. And our first question is from an intrigued feline who says, why does applying engineering stuff to a completely unrelated field like biology, why does one, and Ahmed, apply engineering stuff to a completely unrelated field like biology? It does not follow. So, Ahmed, if you'd like to respond to that, go ahead.
Yeah, because biology is exactly about engineering living things. That's what biology is about. Biology is taking building blocks like biochemicals and using them to encode information, encapsulating them into a system, which is like a cell, putting a super system on top of that, which controls morphogenesis to make it a complete organism, and then putting firmware on that so that the organism really understands that it is an organism and has an identity, and then giving it more external information to be able to react to its environment. And all of those concepts are essentially engineering concepts. And the day that humanity will be able to create autonomous systems is the day where humanity will understand more about how biological systems work autonomously. And this is exactly what we're doing. This is exactly what we're doing. So if the question is, what does engineering have to do with biology? I think the question should be answered the other way around. What is biology without engineering?
All right, well, that's about a minute.
It is not
so we're going to see if Jackson has a quick response.
It is not even a coincidence that they call it genetic
We're at about a minute, so we're going to let Jackson have a quick response, and then if you want a final few words, you can have that. So Jackson, give a quick response.
Sure, there can be overlap between the two fields, but engineering is not or any engineered structure is not a good analogy for the process of evolution, simply because it fails in what the definition of evolution is, which is generating variations over generations. Designed objects do not do that.
Okay, and if you will have the last few words, Ahmed, that's fine. And then we'll move on to the next question.
It's not a
so the hallmark of engineering today, is to build self-replicating systems, and this is how we want to occupy space. So yes, engineering is going into self-replicating systems eventually to imitate biology.
Okay, and we have a question for Jackson. Jackson,
in that one regard,
Jackson,
sure.
No. We don't get you don't get a second reply on the questions. Come on, don't make my job harder. We have a question for you, and it is from. Let me double check.
Fight me, Dapper.
Well, later. Well, I'll meet you outside. This is from Kia No. What's your favorite cheese, Jackson? It's a question. What's your favorite cheese, man?
I am not a cheese person. I apologize. I'm not a cheese person. I guess I like Swiss is fine.
Okay. Do you have a counter, Ahmed? You want to disagree?
No, I think
okay, fair
enough.
Okay. So this is from.
What's his favorite cheese?
Oh yeah, what's your favorite cheese? Come on.
Oh well, my favorite cheese. Well, I don't know. Roquefort maybe.
Okay, that's a respectable answer there.
Okay,
all right,
I'll have to try that then.
From Mr. Serious, as humans, we don't fully grasp how the human mind works. Does that mean we cannot use it? And I'm not sure if that's directed towards anyone in particular. So I'm going to say that Ahmed, you can answer that first with about a minute or so, and then I'll let Jackson give about a minute, and then no responses. We'll just end there. So go ahead.
So guess what? Just yesterday, I wrote an article called Breathing, where I were explaining that we have no idea on Earth about how breathing works. Yet we breathe. And we breathe, and the cell membrane in the lungs would take the oxygen, give it to the red blood cells, it will go into hemoglobin, it will go into the rest of the body, and there are all the checks and balances there. It's crazy. And we don't know anything about it. As individuals, we can know as scientists, but we still breathe. So what does that tell us? This is one of the levels of information I was talking about. You don't only have a system, you have a system that has the operating instructions for itself because it's an engineered system. That's my comment on that.
Okay, and Jackson,
the system on its own is horrible.
Okay.
The system on its own, the information to understand and operate the system is in the system.
All right.
And this only happens when somebody not only programs the hardware, but also the firmware and the software.
You've now gone over. So Jackson, you have about a minute. Go.
I don't know what on earth you mean by no one knows how it works. We know very intimately on the molecular level, like every step of the process, how it works. So from like oxygen being involved in the electron transport chain, to, yeah, as you said, attaching to hemoglobin and being transported. So you yourself just explained it. I don't know what you mean by we don't know anything about it. Anyway.
So this is.
Can I comment there?
Nope, because we gave everyone about a minute because it wasn't directed towards anyone in particular. So we're just going to give two statements there. So we're going to move on to the next one.
Just to clarify what I feel.
So
what it means is that you don't need to know to breathe. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. But when I say that we're not giving second responses, that means that we're not. So if I have to keep trying to remind people of the format,
all right,
that will become a problem. So let's see. JG says, for the engineer, which I assume is Ahmed, this This is a little bit of a snarky one, so you don't have to respond much if you don't want to. This is for the engineer, which is Ahmed. It is, quote, "it boggles my mind," unquote, a good argument.
When something boggles your mind because it's complex, the mind-boggling here stands for something, because functional complexity is a pointer to design. That's why mind-boggling things catch our attention.
Okay, Jackson, do you have any response to that? Try to keep it under 30 seconds.
Nope.
Okay.
Next question.
In that case, we do have a question for Jackson. Jackson, this is from Vesta Freya. What is the speciation event you wanted to bring up? You have about a minute or so to mention it, and then we are going to give Ahmed a chance to respond.
I closed my freaking PowerPoint. God dang it!
Do you remember?
Okay,
it?
well the short version is, yeah, to an extent, not in the detail that I had.
Come on.
The short version is, so there are these little shrimpy guys. They're in the Cambrian. They I don't remember their exact position. I don't think they're crustaceans though. I think they're just basal arthropods. But anyways, there's one called Waptia, and Waptia lays a lot of eggs. Relative to the slightly later form, Chuangdianella, I believe is the name, which lays fewer eggs. And now they look almost identical, but Chuangdianella lays slightly fewer eggs, which is kind of interesting. You see this very slight shift in the from R to K selection in these fossils, and the researchers correlate it with an increasing predation in their area.
All right, Jackson. So now, Ahmed, you have about 30 seconds or so if you want to respond to that. If you don't, that's fine too.
I don't have a problem with speciation events. I said that already.
Okay.
Creatures can change according to epigenetics and according to many other things.
All right, and Jackson, if you have a last few words, do you want to respond? You can have like 15 seconds. Nope.
What's the next question?
All right, this is from Tyler West, who super chatted for $9.99. Thank you very much for your generous super chat. This is for Finding Truth. If life was created by a supernatural, I think the word being is missing there, a supernatural being, do you have an objective, verifiable mechanism to even detect the supernatural to show your assertion is even a possibility?
Yeah, so it's obvious that life is designed. This is what I'm saying. Now, this design needs intelligence. There is no other intelligence that we know about except us, and we were not here 3.8 billion years ago. So unless you believe in panspermia, and not only panspermia, that also aliens are continuously managing the evolution of life, there is no other solution except to accept that there is a supernatural being controlling it. Right. If there is a natural being controlling it, you have to find it.
All right, and Jackson, if you'd like, you can have about 30 seconds or so to respond to that.
Remind us.
The question was, 1 second, sorry. The question was, if life was created by a supernatural being, do you have an objective, verifiable mechanism to even detect the supernatural to show your assertion is even a possibility?
No, when I had my debate with Fazal Rana, I challenged him to do exactly that, and he didn't, and he admitted that there is no way to do that in the case of the Cambrian, because I had this exact discussion with him, and I appreciated his honesty in that regard. So,
okay, and
that's my answer.
Ahmed, if you have another quick follow-up, you get about 15 seconds to follow up if you'd like.
Yeah, typically, according to causality, every cause can be inferred by its effects. And when you see design and when you see codes and information, you understand it's coming from an intelligent mind. And since there was no intelligent minds 3.8 billion years ago,
that's 15 seconds.
The only answer is...
That's 15 seconds?
Supernatural, yeah.
All right, so our next question is from Neslig20, and he says, how does Ahmed define information in such a way that it is actually measurable, and in what units? How much information does a bike, a car, a wooden hut, and the Empire State Building have? So you got about a minute or so. I know that's a pretty big question, but see what you can do.
Yeah, so there is no information quantification for a car than for any other engineering artifact, because a car can be described in so many ways according to the engineer who's describing it. The only way, in my opinion, is to start from the product and write specifications. And it would be a comparative matter. So unless you are guaranteeing that the developer is completely efficient in writing the specifications, then you can start quantifying. But we have no guarantee for that.
Okay.
So unless the information is numerical or something, yeah.
Okay. And Jackson,
Otherwise you don't have.
About 30 seconds if you want to.
Yeah, my major point throughout this debate was to find a way to quantify it numerically, and that was not really done. There were some kind of gestures at it, but until that's been actually done, there's no real way to talk about information. So anyway.
All right, and if you would like, you can have up to 15 seconds or so for a final word on that question.
Yeah, so if you see somebody describing a cup, somebody can describe it in 2 pages, and somebody can describe it in 2 sentences. You need to start by the cup, and you put a format for the description,
right,
and then you can
15
quantify the
seconds.
information.
So our next question is from Little Bear William the Caring Soul. There's a long name. Thank you very much, Little Bear William the Caring Soul. Question for the man on the right, which was Ahmed at the time that he put this in. Can you tell me about my DNA? Tell me, please. So I guess what can you tell people about their DNA, Ahmed, in a minute or so?
Well, I can tell people about their DNA is that it has a parts list of what is needed to build their body. It has a system to express those parts lists, so it creates enzymes that can read the DNA. It has the system that can translate this into the parts, so it manages the manufacturing. And it unfolds in a miraculous way so that 1 sperm and 1 egg will be a human being. And it's not doing this alone, because there is so much other information that we don't know where the hell they're coming from. So if this is not evidence for design, I don't think anything is.
All right, and Jackson, you have about 30 seconds if you want to.
Well, I will just point you over to my channel. We have an entire playlist titled Genetics, where we go through basic concepts in genetics. Our most recent video in that playlist was about vertical inheritance. So go check that out.
All right. And before we give the 15 or so seconds, if Ahmed wants it, I do want to point out that we have more questions in than I'm likely to be able to get to. So if you do have a burning question and I haven't gotten to it, and it was recently sent, pretty much the only way it's going to get through is if it is a new super chat. So sorry about that. I know that a lot of people have interesting questions that they want answered, but we may be able to get to them on an after show. There is a link to an after show in the description to this. It will still be on my channel. So if you want to, that'll be starting sometime after this. I'm going to have to get myself something quick to eat before we keep going, but you know. So our next question is from CRISPR-Cas9. This is, I guess, for both. Are the eyes of planaria actually eyes, and would they fossilize? And so let's start with, in this case, we're going to start with Jackson. He hasn't been answering as many questions. So we're going to give him a minute, and then we're going to give Ahmed a minute, and then that will be it for that question. So go ahead, Jackson, for 1 minute.
Well, I would consider them eyes, yes, because I don't think you have to just... I don't think the definition of eyes that biologists normally use is it has to be like object forming, which is why they consider things like simple photoreceptors eyes, things like that. But also, I would say I did already answer the question about would it fossilize. The answer is no, which is why I pointed to the Bermuda Triangle defense in that regard.
Okay, and
so there you go. There you have it.
And Ahmed, if you would like, you can have up to a minute or so to talk about whether or not you think the eyes of planaria count as eyes and whether they would fossilize. Go ahead.
Well, I don't think it will fossilize. It's the whole thing. I don't think will easily. However, I responded to a specific question by Jackson about how we would contextually define an eye for the context that we were discussing. Somebody can define an eye the way he wants, but then the finite jump in complexity is undeniable. Whether you consider that there was no eye completely, which is the case, or you consider a photocell or an eye spot an eye, the huge jump in complexity is undeniable. This is the whole point.
Okay. And now we have from an intrigued feline, I believe this is for Ahmed. What about people with Down syndrome? Do they have more information? They have an extra duplicate chromosome, yet they often function less than most other humans. You have a minute or so to respond to that.
Down syndrome is a syndrome. It's a disorder. So when I'm not sure. So if somebody with sickle cell has more information, he has a different kind of information that defines his hemoglobin, and it gives him a disadvantage and it gives him an advantage. So if you consider this an extra level of complexity, I'm glad. It doesn't make a difference. The issue is when you go to the very fine-tuned things, is a car that is working on gasoline more complicated than a car that is working on natural gas? I think the question will be very difficult. But again, when you're comparing a car to a bicycle or a trilobite to a Dickinsonia, you will not be in that. That's why Cambrian Explosion is so spectacular.
All right. And Jackson, you have about 30 seconds if you'd like.
I don't really have an answer to the originally posed question, because I don't think there is a metric for information. So,
all right, that's fair. We now have 2 new super chats, and these might end up being the last questions that we take. So we have for $5 from Vandali 1998 for both. Why are some of the designs so bad, like the giraffe cord around the heart? And I believe that's the recurrent laryngeal nerve that he's talking about. If both of you could talk for a minute or so about why why there's so many, or why there are designs that seem bad, and we'll start with Jackson. Go ahead for one minute.
There's a concept called what is it called? It's like phylogenetic constraints. That's what it is. And so when you have an organ with a body plan or design or whatever, you can only improve on that. You can't go back to the starting board. Unlike in design things, but with non-design things, you can't do that. You have to keep going with what you have, and so you end up with recurrent laryngeal nerves, which stretch, like 15 feet in giraffes and 92 feet in Supersaurus and things like that. But that precisely occurs because you can't go back to the drawing boards like with cars or airplanes or skyscrapers.
Okay, and for about a minute or so, Ahmed, what do you have?
All right, so this matter of argument from poor design is essentially, in my opinion, an argument from more or less like from ignorance, with all due respect to the man who's making the question. Human ignorance, not personal ignorance. So you have the same was for the appendix, for where the retina is in the human eye, we're here and there. So now, if the long neck of a giraffe is like following a Lamarckian mechanism or an epigenetic mechanism, then that explains it. However, in engineering, we have something called trade-offs. And since we do not understand all the design parameters, we cannot understand the trade-offs. If the giraffe is the result of an epigenetic response, then it is understood why this is. If it is a genuine creature, then maybe we need to expand our knowledge. However, I know there are some research and articles about why the cords in the giraffe are specifically this way.
Okay,
I cannot just remember it right now.
That's fine. All right, so our last question, and I just want to acknowledge we did get a super sticker from Woody for £1.49, who sent a very cute unicorn with a rainbow mane and tail. So thank you very much for that. It is definitely appreciated. But from Sun's Clan for $9.99 US, every engineering design has a blueprint so we can replicate and build it. Do you have the blueprint for organic life? And I believe that it's directed at Ahmed, so go ahead and take a minute.
Can you please repeat the question, because the sound cut off a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Every engineering blueprint every engineering design has a blueprint so that we can replicate it and build it. Do you have the blueprint for organic life?
Do I have it? I think this is the $1 trillion question. We only understand the architecture. We understand, or we think we understand the architecture. Genetics is only like, I don't know, 60 or 70 years old. So epigenetics is just 20 years old. Gene regulatory networks are not that far anyway. So we know that this is a hierarchical design, and we know that it's ingenious, and we know that it is so compact, but I don't think anybody has the blueprint. No, if we had the blueprint, we would be able to clearly answer and easily answer the information question. And that's why we have to act on morphologies.
All right, and Jackson, if you would like, you can have about 30 seconds.
The very question of what is life. Yeah.
Okay, Jackson?
I'm not sure what you really mean by we know this is masterful or whatever. ERVs don't seem very masterful to me. Pseudogenes don't seem very masterful to me. The fact that our somewhere around 20% of our DNA actually either participates in protein coding or regulatory functions doesn't seem very masterful to me.
All right, and Ahmed, this is the last bit of question and answer, so if you would like, you can have about 15 seconds or so to respond to that, and then we're going to go into our closing sections.
So at a point of time, people thought that 2% of our DNA was doing something, and it's growing and growing. I think at one day, we will know that 100% of our DNA is doing things. And I think jumping into conclusions about what is functional and not is very premature.
All right, nice. So we are going to do some closing statements because we are getting pretty close to where we want to cut this off at about 2 hours. I'm going to go ahead and say about 3 minutes. If you go a little bit over, that's fine, but try to keep it to 3 minutes. And we're going to start with Jackson, and then we're going to go to Ahmed. Then I will make sure that everyone knows that there is an after show that I will be at, and I will be making sure that these two have a link, and a few other people will be able to get the link. And that will start probably about an hour from when we end, because I need to make myself some lunch, because it's about noon here. So, Jackson, go ahead and start with your closing 3-ish minutes.
All right, well, my closing is that, well, really none of my questions throughout this debate were answered. I think Ahmed pretty well pointed out there is no definition of information that's applicable to living systems. He waxed poetic about cars and whatnot, and that's fine, but that's not relevant here. We didn't actually touch any of the data whatsoever regarding the actual sequence of organisms. I tried to bring that up at the end, but we only had like 6 or so minutes left, so it didn't really get to talk about it. So yeah, really, none of my major points were affected. And that's really all I got. If you like evolution stuff and debunking creationism, go check out my channel. So, oh, and we have a book, The Rocks Were There, with RJ Downard. So there you go. All
right, well, you stopped in with less than a minute.
He'll beat me if I don't say that.
All right. Well, Ahmed, you now have up to about 3 minutes for your closing, and then I'm going to let everyone know where the after show is, and we're going to get out of here. So go ahead, Ahmed.
Okay, so what I would like to say here is that we have the most sophisticated discipline of study, which is the study of of living things, biology, microbiology, genetics, and this whole discipline. And it is very obvious to any observer, to any fair observer, not just researchers and scientists, that the most sophisticated machines on the face of this planet and probably in the universe, unless we find other living things, is the life forms that we see around us. They are more sophisticated than the most sophisticated machines that we have built. They are specified functionally. They are quite complex. They are so complex that with the most intelligent receptive system on Earth, which is the human brain, we just keep learning, and the more we learn, the more we know that we have always known much less than we thought. The premise that this marvelous discipline intentionally takes the possibility of design out of the picture and considers it pseudoscience is so unfair to the observation, is so unfair to the scientific method, and is so unfair to the human intellect. I consider it insulting. to the human intellect. That when you see design, and you see the implications of acknowledging the design, so you have to deny it. You have to refer to methodological naturalism. Unfairly refer to methodological naturalism. You're essentially referring to philosophical naturalism. Because science is about understanding things the way they are. And if science takes you to design, if observation takes you to information, and to a continuous transmission of information, and you want otherwise to cancel this from the picture for philosophical reasons, for epistemological reasons, I think that the humankind and the scientific community is doing to itself and to the human race the worst disservice that can be done by depriving humanity from the realization that when something is designed, you pursue to understand. When you think something is random, it's random. Inquiry and eagerness to know is completely in a different place when you're looking at a design thing. I hope this worldview gets off the table from the scientific community soon.
All right. Well, that was almost exactly 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. So
I had a timer.
Nice. Yeah. So what I'm going to say to everyone is, remember, if you would like to see more from these people, I did mention their channels in the description, so you can click on their names in the description and get to their channels. So please subscribe to both Jackson and Finding Truth. Again, in about an hour, I'm gonna start an after show. It's just gonna be in the same room. So Ahmed and Jackson, if you want in, even if you leave, it's just the same link to get back in. And I hope to see all of you there. And if I get both of them back, I think if they're both okay with it, we can go through the last few questions that we didn't get to during the debate. So maybe if we can get them both back, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll just have a discussion about how whoever is there thought the debate went. And
I'll probably join in. I'll have a bite too, and probably I'll join in.
All right.
I hope Jackson comes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to go and hit my end credits, and I will see you over on the linked after show, which again is in the description, so you don't even have to try to navigate to my channel page. It's right there. You can just click on it, and it'll take you to that YouTube page. So hopefully I'll see everybody there. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Jackson.
I'd like to just take a moment to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above: Ben Tovand, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, and The Venerable Bede. My channel members and patrons help make this a much more stable income, because as you might know, ad income varies wildly from month to month, even with the same number of views. And it really helps this channel stay on the air. But if a monthly pledge, or a yearly pledge, which I have now activated, isn't right for you, there's a merch store linked in the description, and every like, share, and subscription really helps the channel grow. Also, those pledging $10 or above will have access to free 3D art assets, including materials and models, which will be made for Blender by me and can be used in any project without crediting me